We start with an introduction that introduces the protagonist, Jordan, and the world he navigates. The opening describes the setting of the urban neighborhood, where disparities are clear between the affluent and those struggling, both economically and racially. Jordan is a bright, determined 17-year-old with dreams of becoming a lawyer. He volunteers in local youth programs and is well liked by his peers and teachers, symbolizing the hope that lies in the youth. However, his experiences with systemic prejudice begin to surface when he's unjustly stopped by Officer Collins. The first conflict begins as Jordan walks home after a day of volunteering. Officer Collins, who patrols this neighborhood, pulls over, suspicious of Jordan. Collins's prejudice is immediately clear, and as the conversation escalates, he accuses Jordan of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dialogue. Example. Officer Collins, sternly. "Where do you think you're going, kid? This isn't your neighborhood." Jordan, calm, respectful. "I'm just heading home, officer. I live around here." Officer Collins, "You look like trouble. Let's see what you're hiding." As the frisking begins, Collins discovers the badge in Jordan's pocket, a badge that will be the catalyst for much of the emotional turmoil to follow. Key emotional beat. The badge is a family heirloom, representing a connection to Jordan's father, who was once a police officer but was dismissed under corrupt circumstances. This badge is symbolic of Jordan's struggles with his family's lost legacy and his hopes to restore it one day. Jordan is taken to the station, and the reality of his situation begins to sink in. He's not just a student with dreams. He's a black teenager in a broken system that views him as a suspect, not a person. Jordan, internal thoughts. Why is this happening? I've done everything right. Good grades, volunteering. Why am I the one in handcuffs? As he sits in a holding cell, Jordan grapples with doubt, fear, and anger, and his world has shifted from one of hope to one of despair, and the realization of systemic racism starts to form. He begins to understand that being black means facing constant prejudice. Meanwhile, Officer Collins is conflicted. He starts to feel uneasy when he learns about the badge, realizing that Jordan's family might have a legitimate connection to law enforcement, which shakes his preconceived notions. Officer Collins, to himself, reflecting. Could I have been wrong? But he doesn't fit the profile. Jordan's mother, Ms. Thompson, arrives at the station demanding answers. The officers dismiss her, adding another layer to the story. Not only is Jordan being treated unjustly, but his mother is also fighting against a system that disregards her rights. Ms. Thompson, frantic. "You can't do this to my son. You can't just take him and not tell me why." The officers, cold and dismissive, show no empathy, highlighting the deep-rooted racism that affects even those trying to seek justice. Jordan's friends, Maya and Carlos, take matters into their own hands. They rally the community, using social media to bring attention to Jordan's situation. Protests erupt and people from all walks of life show up to support him. Through these scenes, the script emphasizes the power of solidarity and the role of allies in fighting systemic injustice. Maya, on the phone organizing. "We need to show up. We need to be loud. People need to see that we won't stand for this." Carlos, leading a protest. "This isn't just Jordan's fight. This is our fight. For every black person who's ever been unjustly treated." As protests continue to grow, Collins is forced to confront his own actions. The guilt begins to weigh heavily on him. He begins attending self-reflection sessions, realizing that his prejudice may have contributed to the systemic oppression he vowed to fight against as a police officer. The climactic moment comes when Collins is forced to attend an internal review meeting, following the public outcry over Jordan's treatment. The review is tense and Jordan's testimony becomes the turning point. Jordan, emotional, speaking to the review board. "I was just walking home. I didn't deserve this, and my father. He worked as an officer. He believed in the badge. But what does it mean now? What does it mean when someone like Officer Collins can use that badge against me?" Collins stands up and for the first time admits his mistakes. He doesn't offer excuses. He simply expresses remorse. Officer Collins. Slowly. I was wrong. I see that now. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and for that I am sorry. In the aftermath, Jordan's family begins to heal. The community rallies together and reforms begin to take shape. Collins embarks on a personal journey to confront his own biases, seeking redemption by engaging in workshops on racial justice and opening dialogues with those he once dismissed. Jordan, empowered by the experience, renews his dream of becoming a lawyer, realizing that his fight for justice is far from over. The community's unity grows, with protests evolving into peaceful marches advocating for racial equality and police reform. Jordan, reflecting, "We're not done, not by a long shot, but this is a start." The story closes with Jordan walking through his neighborhood, reflecting on the changes that have begun. He holds his father's badge, not just as a symbol of the past, but as a beacon for the future. His future shaped by resilience and the pursuit of justice. This story explores the harsh realities of racism, the impact of systemic injustice, and the emotional arc of individuals coming to terms with their biases. Through Jordan's journey, we see the power of personal growth, empowerment, and the collective strength of a community willing to fight for justice. It's a cool evening, the sun dipping below the horizon. Jordan walks alone through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, his backpack slung over his shoulder. His mind is preoccupied with the day's events, how he helped tutor a younger kid after school, the way he helped an elderly woman carry her groceries, and the sense of purpose he felt as he gave back to the community. Jordan's steps are steady, but his thoughts are interrupted when the sharp sound of a police car's siren cuts through the air. The car pulls up beside him, its headlights blinding against the darkening street. Officer Collins pulls the car to a stop and steps out. His uniform, stiff and imposing, contrasts sharply with Jordan's casual attire. Collins is a man in his mid-30s, hardened by years of service in the department. The neighborhood Jordan calls home isn't one he's familiar with, and it's clear in the officer's eyes. There's tension in the air, a subtle sense of unease that only someone who's been on the receiving end of bias can feel. Officer Collins, authoritatively, "Hey you, stop right there." Jordan doesn't flinch, but instead turns to face him, his expression neutral. He knows the drill: keep calm, be respectful. Jordan, casually with a friendly nod, "Evening, officer. I'm just heading home." Officer Collins, eyeing him suspiciously, "Really? 'Cause this neighborhood, it's not exactly where people like you should be walking alone at night." Jordan pauses, his heart rate picking up, but he keeps his cool. He's heard this before. It's a line he's grown used to hearing, though it stings every time. Jordan, firmly but respectfully, "I live here, officer. I'm not doing anything wrong." The officer doesn't seem convinced. He takes a step closer, his eyes scanning Jordan up and down. The distrust is palpable, and the weight of it presses on Jordan's chest. He can feel the shift in power, the way Collins automatically assumes he's guilty of something. Officer Collins, smirking, "Let's see about that." Without warning, he steps forward and starts patting Jordan down. The harshness of the gesture feels unnecessary, invasive. Jordan stands still, biting back the urge to protest, but inside his mind races. Why him? Why tonight? He tries to keep his breathing steady, focusing on the fact that he knows he's done nothing wrong. Jordan, calmly, "You're not going to find anything, officer." The officer doesn't respond but continues with the search. Collins moves down to Jordan's pockets, his hands roughly patting through the fabric of his hoodie. Then his fingers brush against something, a cold metallic object. Collins freezes for a second, pulling the item out from Jordan's jacket pocket. Officer Collins, confused, holding up the object. "What's this? A badge?" Jordan's heart skips a beat. The badge in Collins' hand isn't just any badge, it's his father's. His dad had been a police officer in this very city before being wrongfully dismissed under questionable circumstances. The badge has been in Jordan's family for years, passed down through generations as a symbol of honor. It's not a symbol of crime. It's a symbol of something much bigger than that. Jordan, with a slight tremble, trying to remain composed. That's my father's badge. Officer Collins, his tone sharp, suspicious. Your father's badge? What? You think that gives you some kind of special treatment? You got any other surprises for me, kid? Jordan, steadily, but with a growing sense of unease. No, officer, my father was a cop. That badge it's a family heirloom. The officer's eyes narrow as he processes Jordan's words. For a moment, there's a flicker of hesitation in Collins's demeanor. The badge in his hand now feels like an obstacle, a problem he didn't expect. But instead of showing understanding, the suspicion only deepens. Officer Collins, coldly. Yeah? Well, your father must have been a real disappointment to the force then, huh? No wonder you're here, holding on to some old symbol of failure. The words sting, but Jordan doesn't react outwardly. He feels the weight of them settle in his chest, but he holds his ground. Jordan, quietly, trying to explain. My father, he was good. He was a good man. Officer Collins, gruffly. I'm sure he was, but you're not him. The air feels thick with tension now. The badge, once a symbol of legacy, has become a marker of suspicion, a burden on Jordan's shoulders. Collins doesn't seem to care about the family history. All he sees is another black teenager, another person to suspect, another name to add to his list of people he's convinced are up to no good. Jordan, stepping back slightly, now sensing the escalation. Look, I don't have time for this. I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm just trying to get home. Officer Collins, grabbing his radio. Yeah, we'll see about that. Stay put. At this point, Jordan is detained, his world beginning to shift from confusion to fear. His thoughts spiral as he's led toward the police car, and the weight of everything starts to hit him. What did I do? Why is this happening? As the officer's words blur into the background, Jordan's mind drifts back to the conversations he's had with his father about the badge, about justice, and about the hopes of making a difference. He never imagined he'd be standing here, in handcuffs, with the legacy of that badge twisting into something completely foreign. Jordan is sitting in a cold, sterile holding cell, his hands trembling as he presses them against the metal bench. His mind is spinning, unable to comprehend the events that have unfolded. Just a few hours ago, he was walking home from volunteering, full of optimism, his future ahead of him. Now, he finds himself in a holding cell, a suspect, treated like a criminal. The walls of the station seem to close in on him. The harsh fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Every tick of the clock on the wall sounds louder, more oppressive. His mind races with questions that have no answers. What did I do? Why is this happening? The sound of footsteps echoes down the hallway, and Jordan looks up to see an officer passing by. The officer doesn't even glance in his direction, as if he doesn't care who's behind the bars. Jordan knows the drill, the unspoken rule that a young black man in a police station is never given the benefit of doubt. His thoughts drift to his mother, Ms. Thompson. She must be frantic by now, wondering where he is. He can imagine her calls to his phone, hearing it go straight to voicemail. He feels guilty for not answering, but part of him is afraid to make any noise. Part of him is afraid that if he says anything, it'll only make things worse. Jordan's head falls into his hands as he sits on the bench, his elbows resting on his knees. He leans forward, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of it all. The questions keep coming, unrelenting. How could this happen? He had done everything right, stayed out of trouble, volunteered, worked hard in school. Why did the officer stop him? Why did the badge make things worse? Why did it make him a suspect? Great. Let's continue with the next scene, focusing on the weight of being a suspect as Jordan is taken to the police station. Scene: the weight of being a suspect. Jordan is sitting in a cold, sterile holding cell, his hands trembling as he presses them against the metal bench. His mind is spinning, unable to comprehend the events that have unfolded. Just a few hours ago, he was walking home from volunteering, full of optimism, his future ahead of him. Now, he finds himself in a holding cell, a suspect, treated like a criminal. The walls of the station seem to close in on him. The harsh fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Every tick of the clock on the wall sounds louder, more oppressive. His mind races with questions that have no answers. What did I do? Why is this happening? The sound of footsteps echoes down the hallway, and Jordan looks up to see an officer passing by. The officer doesn't even glance in his direction, as if he doesn't care who's behind the bars. Jordan knows the drill, the unspoken rule that a young black man in a police station is never given the benefit of doubt. His thoughts drift to his mother, Ms. Thompson. She must be frantic by now, wondering where he is. He can imagine her calls to his phone, hearing it go straight to voicemail. He feels guilty for not answering, but part of him is afraid to make any noise. Part of him is afraid that if he says anything, it'll only make things worse. Inner turmoil. Doubt and fear. Jordan's head falls into his hands as he sits on the yaw bench, his elbows resting on his knees. He leans forward, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of it all.